Hey guys, we're finally back for a nice segment of the Grind Never Stops podcast. I wasn't able to record in these days because I did not feel well, but we are back and today I turned 29. So I want to thank everyone who has given me birthday wishes. But let's get going and start talking about sports. So first we'll start with the NBA first round recap and we'll also preview the second round and then we will end the episode on talking about the Montreal Canadiens. But first, we want to start for the first round recap. So the number one seed Sixers played the eighth seed Wiz, and we all knew that this matchup was gonna finish quicker than any matchup in these playoffs, but Joel Embiid missed the end of Game 3 and he also missed Game 4, so that's why the Wizards pulled up for a victory and the Sixers were not ready to play without Joel Embiid. But in Game 5, the Sixers played great defense and kept shooting hot from downtown, and Danny Green had a great game, and also Tobias Harris, who was the X factor of this matchup. He had a big game, and he also had 5 big games for the Sixers. But this matchup was no competition, even though it was Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal, because the rest of the team is straight up garbage. And we will talk about the Wizards in another segment because they will have a busy offseason because of what they're going to do about Bradley Beal. What they're going to do once Thomas Bryant comes back for the Wiz. They have a lot of questions, but the Wizards need a lot of guys. There's going to be a lot of guys on the market, a lot of guys that they can trade for, and I think Bradley Beal's value is pretty high right now. So if they wanna flirt with these trade offers, they can do it because they have high value for Bradley Beal and they can get someone great in return because he was second in league scoring. He was probably the second best scorer behind Steph Curry in the regular season because he struggled in the playing game against the Celtics. He had an efficient game against the Pacers, but ever since game 1 to like game 5, he struggled from the floor. And we're not forgetting Russell Westbrook. Yes, he can average triple doubles, but Russell Westbrook never shoots in a good field goal percentage in the playoffs, and we saw that in every single game. But that's why the Wizards didn't have enough. And we will talk about the Washington Wizards in another segment. But the Sixers advanced to the second round, and they have been to the second round for the third 3 of the last 4 years, and it's funny how all of their losses was against a team that got eliminated in the first round, which was the Celtics, in which we will talk now. So the Brooklyn Nets, the second seeded Nets, played the 7 seed Celtics, and I thought that the Celtics can give more. And I thought this could go maybe 6 games or even 7. But Jason Tatum, yes, he had a great, amazing game 3. He also had a great game in game 4. But yeah, he had a great game 3 and decent game 4, but game 5 was one of his worst performances in his career in the playoffs. He wasn't shooting the ball well, and yes, he got injured late in the season, and he got injured again after a hard elbow to the face by Kevin Durant, which they did not call a foul on that play. But Jason Tatum played great in the first couple games, went for 50, but since that game he struggled. And Jason Tatum is not the player that can get. He's not there yet. He has the potential. He has the potential. But everyone else struggled from the floor. Kemba Walker missed the last 2 games for the Celtics, and he was a key player. Also, Robert Williams, who came in these playoffs as an injured NBA player, but he still played and had great performances on the defensive end. As in game 1, he had 8 blocks. He almost had a triple-double. But Robert Williams also missed the last 2 games, and he was a key piece for the Celtics all season long. But you guys gotta remember, injuries are a part of the game. And yes, they lost Jaylen Brown, but still, I still think the Celtics could still have it with Marcus Smart and Tristan Thompson. But other than Jason Tatum's Game 3, the rest, everyone played like garbage. And the Nets did have a lot of turnovers in the first couple of games, but the problem was the Celtics cannot take advantage. And when you play a super team powerhouse in the Nets, you gotta take advantage of them turning the ball over. And that's what the Celtics cannot do on both ends on the floor, offensively and defensively. That's why the Nets won in 5. Everyone had great games, and yes, maybe Kyrie 14 points in game 4 or game 5 wasn't great, but he still had 11 boards. And I think Kyrie needs to keep shooting. And since James Harden, well, we'll talk about Harden while we talk about the second round preview. But James Harden and Kevin Durant played magnificent against the Celtics. And Jason, like, that was a great matchup to see because on both teams, their fans were saying JT cannot handle Kevin Durant behind the 3-point arc, and people said that KD cannot stay and guard with Jason Tatum. But obviously, Kevin Durant won that matchup because if Jason Tatum won that matchup, we wouldn't be talking up on how the Celtics can take the Nets more than 5 games. And for the Celtics, they just completely turned around. As soon as they lost, Danny Ainge resigned. And then Brad Stevens moved up. So right now, the Boston Celtics do not have a head coach, and they're going to be looking for a head coach, as there are a lot of candidates to coach the Celtics. And I think there's a lot of great. There's like Jason Kidd, who's an assistant in Los Angeles. There's Luke Walton, who might be fired, could be a great coach for the Boston Celtics. So next, we will talk about the Atlanta Hawks, who played the New York Knicks. And this matchup, I thought, man, the Knicks could at least win this matchup. But in the end, the Knicks just got outmatched. And I told you guys, the only reason that the Atlanta Hawks could beat the New York Knicks as fast as they did, if they had this 3-point shooting going, if Bogdanovich steps out of the slump that he had, if Gallinari goes off the bench, and if Trae Young continues what he has been doing since the Hawks fired their head coach early in the season, and they ended the season on a high note, but it doesn't matter. Playoffs is a different animal. That's why I told you. The Hawks, the only reason they could win against Randall and the Knicks, if they have their 3-point shooting going, if Trae Young keeps doing the icy Trae Young things, and if Bogdanovich steps out of the slump, continues what he did at the beginning of the season, and if everyone does their role, and About Jason Collins, he did not have offensively. He was quiet in all 5 games, but defensively he played great. And I also said that they need to contain Julius Randle, the most improved player who's almost averaging a triple double. They need to contain Julius Randle because the X factor for the Hawks is containing Julius Randle. It's not any player for the Atlanta Hawks because the only great player on the Knicks, and don't tell me RJ Barrett is a good player. He struggled from downtown mightily. He struggled from the field. He couldn't get anything done. Because I know you guys said RJ Barrett has had his best 3-point percentage, better than any player that was drafted in his draft class. But the playoffs he struggled. The Knicks won only 1 game, and that was game 2 at MSG. The Hawks outdueled them at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta. It was just a mess. Even though they played 3 times at the Garden and 2 times in Atlanta. And it's Alfred Payne did not have a great couple games, and that's why he got DMPs, he got benched. It wasn't for no reason, because Alfred Payne has been the starter for the Knicks all season long. But when playoff starts and you're struggling, you gotta, and the other guy's red hot, you gotta put the other guy. Especially when it's Derrick Rose, who had a great matchup, but he's not gonna carry the Knicks to the promised land by himself. And Julius Randle struggled all series long. And yes, he had efficient in game 4. And yes, he had a great game in game 5. But those are just average games. Once you get to the playoffs, you gotta average 10 times on what you're averaging. You can't just before the playoffs average 20, 11, and 5, and then during the playoffs you average 17, 11, and 3 with under 36% from the field and 29% from 3. That can't happen for Julius Randle. And this is the problem for the Knicks, is that the opponent had 1 goal, stop Julius Randle, and that's what the Knicks did. They stopped Julius Randle. Also, they contained Derrick Rose after his red hot performances in the first couple of games. They contained him in the next 3. And RJ Barrett struggled. He couldn't get nothing done. And yes, I told you, if the Hawks are gonna win this, they gotta improve the 3-point shooting, continue shooting the 3 in the rate they've been shooting at all series. Well, ever since they fired their old head coach. And Trae Young's gotta be Trae Young and not be the Trae Young of recent years, just trying to be like Dame Dalla and Steph Curry. But the Hawks expected the Knicks to. Everyone gave all, not just Derrick Rose and RJ Barrett. I mean, Derrick Rose and Julius Randle. Just the Knicks can get nothing. And in game 5 was probably the worst game for the Knicks because they turned the ball over as much as 23 times, especially in the final quarter. So the Hawks won in 5. The Hawks played magnificent. Trae Young played amazing. He shut the crowd up in every single game. Even if they lost in game 2, he still played a great game. So the Hawks won in 5 games. Once we're done recapping, we'll do for both conferences, and then we'll do second round preview and who faces who. So the Bucks faced the Miami Heat, and I thought the Heat still had their numbers, but in the end the Bucks surprised me. The Bucks played very well from ever since that game 1 Ever since that overtime started until the final second in Game 4, the Milwaukee Bucks played magnificent basketball. They played great, guys. They played great. And for the Miami Heat, it was a total disappointment for the Miami Heat. Bam Adebayo didn't get his jump shot going until Game 4. Tyler Hero was nowhere to be found. The Heat thought they could have the Hero bubble, but no, there was no Tyler Hero bubble. It was straight up trash Tyler Hero. Inserting Andre Iguodala to guard Giannis Antetokounmpo did not work out for the Miami Heat because Jimmy Butler did not do anything. He had his worst shooting performance ever in his career. He never shot that horribly from the field, from three, from the free throw line. And yes, he might have a triple-double in Game 4, but what did that do for the Miami Heat? They got swept off the floor. And they should win this matchup. They're predicted to win against the Bucks because they've been having their numbers. So that was horribly by the Miami Heat. The bright side of Miami was Goran Dragic and Kendrick Nunn, but other than that, everyone played like straight up trash. It was a complete disappointment for the Miami Heat. In fact, they played worse than the Knicks in these playoffs because no one could get going, nobody. But the Bucks wanted to make a statement here. They wanted to make a statement and not losing to trash garbage team in the first couple rounds like they did last season. And I'm not telling you that Drew Holiday was the reason they won against the Miami Heat, but everyone played well. Everyone from Dante DiVincenzo, from Pat Connaughton, Brook Lopez, Middleton, Drew, Giannis, everyone played well, everyone did their job, and that's why they won in 4 games. And we'll talk about the Miami Heat in another segment. So that's it for the first round of the Eastern Conference. Now for the second round, the number 1 Jazz played the red hot surprising Grizz. And yes, the Grizzlies, in probably almost every game except Game 5, the Grizzlies were up and down with the Jazz. It was a close game. But the problem is that Jaren Jackson and Giannis Valanciunas got caught into foul trouble in every game very early. So, and Marshawn Brooks had a great matchup, but when the Grizzlies needed a clutch shot, when they needed to take the lead at the end of the quarter or in overtime, they did not get it. And Ja Morant, I'm gonna say choked, but he just couldn't get it done in clutch moments. Because if you look at all the Jazz wins, and before it came to a win for the Jazz, the Grizz and Jazz were tied late, but the Grizzlies just don't have the right amount of players that can make those big shots. And Kyle Anderson is an underappreciated player, and he played great defensively and offensively. But the Jazz, they're number 1 seed in the National Basketball Association for a damn reason. Spider Mitchell was doing his thing after missing a controversial Game 1 loss. So the Jazz advanced in 5. The second seeded played the 7th seeded Lakers. And this was a complete disappointment for the Los Angeles Lakers because the Suns are not playing a 7th seed. Even the Suns know that they're not playing a 7th seed. They're playing LeBron James, one of the best players ever to play the game. Anthony Davis, one of the best big men to ever play. Not to ever play, but in this era. who can shoot, who can play D. But AD was, I understand he's injured, but he's injured all the time, and as a young player, it's not good to be injured super early in your career. So the Lakers need to. I don't know what AD is doing, but it just he's probably not working out in the proper way because he's getting injured all the time. But it's not just Anthony Davis. LeBron was not as aggressive as always. And yes, he has an ankle injury, but injuries happen all the time. But LeBron was not as aggressive. Dennis Schroeder had a couple great games, and he did not have. He had 0 points in Game 5. He was too much passive in Game 6. In fact, he was probably the worst Laker in Game 6. They had to play Alex Caruso, who was a key piece for the championship team last season. They signed Montrezl Harrell, and Montrezl Harrell, you know what he does, but the Lakers did not use him. Also THT. And the Lakers did not want to trade for Lowry. They did not want to give up the Harrells of the world, the Carusos, and the Taylor Horn Tuckers and the Harrells, because they did not want to trade him for Lowry. But if you reject to get an all-star point guard, a former NBA champion, a player that can rebound, pass, assist, play defense, draw charges, so at least use these guys, because they did not use Montrezl Harrell. They did not use AC the way that they should be using him. So the Lakers will have a busy offseason as well. Not as much as the Wizards and the Celtics and the Knicks, but they will have a busy offseason. For the Suns, like I said, the sky is the limit for the second-seeded surprising Suns, because we know what Chris Paul can do on the floor and what he can do off the floor. He's one of the best leaders to ever play in the NBA. But the X factor here was not Chris Paul or LeBron, or it was Devin Booker, D Books. D Books was great ever since he came to the league. But his team never made the playoffs. But as soon as they made it, he had to make the statement in the first round, especially against the Los Angeles Lakers. He played amazing ever since Game 1, and you guys know that he dropped 47 on the Lakers at the Staples Center in Game 6 to get this key win. But everyone's talking about these guys, but no one's talking about how Jay Crowder got into LeBron's heads, got into the Lakers' heads, and he played great defensively, and he shot the 3 ball in a great percentage in the last 3 games. So that was key. So Suns win in 6, they will advance. So the Mavs vs Clippers. This matchup was probably the best matchup other than the Suns and Lakers, because AD was injured, LeBron's injured too. But I think this matchup was the best matchup in the Western Conference, because it was Luka Doncic against Kawhi and PG. And don't get me started of saying, oh, what about Kristaps Porzingis? Kristaps did nothing all matchup long. He wasn't as aggressive. He wasn't rebounding the way he should be rebounding as a 7-footer. He just, yes, he had a big shot in Game 6, but he was doing nothing, man. Like, the man that's being paid $30 million a year did not do anything. And they need to make a decision if they should trade Kristaps Porzingis, because Doncic really needs some help. Because Luka Doncic had a series of his life. He had 3 40-point games. He averaged 33.5. And like, because game 5, he scored 42. Game 6, he scored 29 with 14 assists. Game 7, he scored 46 points, 7 rebounds, and 14 assists. And for the Clippers, it was a horrible performances on the home court, but they played magnificent in Dallas, and they played a great Game 7 because Marcus Morris stepped up in Game 7. Kawhi played magnificent in the last 3 games of this matchup. And also Paul George, but Paul George did not have like a great, like he wasn't the reason the Clippers won 4 games. It was because of Kawhi Leonard. He carried that team, especially in Game 6 when he scored 45. So I think Doncic needs help. But for the Clippers, yes, they advance in 7. But Paul George needs to have better performances from the arc. He needs to be more aggressive. Because if Kawhi had struggled against the Mavericks, it would have been game over for the Clips. And yes, everyone wants to talk about the Dallas blew a 2-0 lead, and then they blew a 3-2 lead. But the Clippers just have more guys that can score in double digits. The Mavericks, Tim Hardaway did have a great matchup, but in game 5, he struggled. In game 6, game 5 he played great, but game 6, game 3s and 4s, Hardaway was nowhere to be found, and game 7 he did not have a great performance from the 3-point line. So the Clippers will advance in 7, and then the Nuggets played the Blazers, and it was a great matchup to see Jokic against Dame, but the Nuggets did not have a Jamal Murray, but they still were able to win in 6, and that's was the problem for the Blazers, and that's why it was time for Terry Stotts to part ways with the Blazers. Because first of all, they should have played Carmelo more. C.J. McCollum had one of his worst playoffs of his career. Damian Lillard was doing Damian Lillard things, but Lillard did not shoot well from downtown in Game 6. And yes, he had a great game in Game 5, but the Nuggets, everyone stepped up to Campazzo, to Monte Morris, who had back-to-back 25-point plus performances. And because since Jamal Murray is out, they needed someone to step out of slump, and that was Aaron Gordon, who hit big shot, and Michael Porter Jr., who's no one's talking about, is one of the reasons they beat the Blazers 4 times, is why they won in 6 games. But the Blazers did not. Yes, Norman Powell had a efficient game, but he's not the player that will give you 40 like Dame Dolla. And that's why they need to make a decision on Damian Lillard, on Norman Powell, and on C.J. McCollum. Because I wouldn't tell you to lie if I would have made that trade. Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood for Norman Powell. Like, I don't know, man, because Gary Trent was playing great defense, and obviously he's a better defender than Powell. And I know Powell was shooting lights out, but having Rodney Hood was great for the Blazers. I just don't get why they made that trade. But the Nuggets will advance in 6 games. So let's do the second round preview. Sixers are playing the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks won game 1, in fact. And the Hawks were up 27 points, but the Sixers ended the second half on a high note, but the Hawks were able to hit big shots down the stretch as Trae Young had his another 30-point outing, as Game 2 is tomorrow night in Philadelphia. And I still got my Sixers beating these Hawks in 6 games. I'll give my prediction first. So the Nets and Bucks. I think the Nets. I'm predicting to win in 6. The Jazz and Clippers. I think the Jazz will win in 7 games. Suns vs Nuggets. I think this will be a toss-up. I think the Suns will get it done in 6. So I talked already about the Sixers and Hawks, and now the Nets against the Milwaukee Bucks. The sky's the limit for both teams because now it's going to be not powerhouse with powers, but it's going to be powerhouse against a great team. Because the bad news is that James Harden left game 1 early, super early, and he missed game 2, and he's expected to probably miss game 3 and 4 and maybe come back for game 5. But since the Nets won both games, they won the second game in a big blowout. It's just the Nets shot lights out in the first quarter. In the first half, at one point it was 60-36. And for the Bucks, I don't think the Bucks have the right type of players to beat these super team Nets. Because Kyrie's gonna do his thing. KD and Blake Griffin, who had one of his best games as a net with 18 points, 11 rebounds. And for the Bucks, I know they got Jrue Holiday, but Jrue Holiday is not better than Kyrie Irving on the offensive end. And maybe in this, Jrue Holiday is probably the best defender both teams combined. But there's no X factor here because both teams, it's now they're down 2-0 going back to Milwaukee. And Giannis, they thought they could use him like how he was used against Miami. But that's a big no-no against Brooklyn Nets. So next it will be Jazz and Clippers. This is time where Paul George needs to take this matchup nightmare because Paul George is obviously taller than Donovan Mitchell, and obviously he's a known scorer better than Spider Mitchell, and that's why the Clippers need Paul George to take it to the next level. Because we know, guys, we know what Kawhi can bring, but this is about Paul George. And for the Jazz, the sky is the limit. For the Utah Jazz, we need Gobert to out-rebound the Zubac, the Ibakas, if he plays. He needs to out-rebound everyone. That's why the Jazz will win in 7. For the Suns and Nuggets, I already gave my prediction, but this is going to be about Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Jay Crowder, Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton against Nikola Jokic. Because Michael Porter is not a star yet, and Aaron Gordon has really struggled since he arrived to Denver from Orlando. But we will see because the X factor is actually Aaron Gordon. And for the Suns, the X factor is once again Devin Booker. Will he make big shots? Will he continue scoring in high pace? Because Jokic will switch on Devin Booker's most of the time with some hard screens. But it's also Chris Paul who can continue getting it done because he's still having a shoulder problem. So that's it, guys, for the NBA first round recap and second round preview. So let's end the show with talking about Les Canadiens de Montreal. So the Habs swept the Jets to advance to the first semifinal since the 2010 seasons, and Carey Price has been playing magnificent and is playing his best hockey since they last went to the semifinals. But the young guns for the Habs are getting it done. But let's not forget Tyler Toffoli, a former NBA champion, a veteran who had big goals in these playoffs and has played well even against Toronto. He had played great defensively. But all the Canadians have been doing is playing great defensively, is containing Pierre-Luc Dubois of the Jets, containing the Winnipeg Jets' big guns. And they've been getting it done on the offensive end, and Carey Price is carrying this team. But for the Jets now, they're a disappointment once again in these playoffs. And the thing that has hurt most for the Jets is the trade that they made earlier in the regular season is getting rid of Patrick Lane, who they thought was better than Austin Matthews. But Lane was not just great offensively, but he was great defensively. And that's what hurt them the most. Because Pierre-Luc Dubois is not better than Patrick Lane. You guys know it and I know it. But Price was wonderful again for Montreal, and they will wait for the Islanders and Bruins and the Lightning and the Carolina Hurricanes. But guys, thanks tuning in for this NBA first round recap and second round preview and talking a little about the Canadiens de Montreal. But guys, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also